The bow tie model is a very interesting way to look at the customer journey and the revenue growth of a business. Whenever you're creating a sales plan, if we were to just focus on sales for a second, whenever you're building a sales plan for the next year, the first place you start is what is our churn rate? Because in order for you to grow, you need to overcome that churn rate. So if we're just using round numbers, if we're a $100 million company and we're losing and we have a churn rate of 15%, that means that off the top,
Welcome to Growth Unlocked Beyond Scale, your gateway to the deeper dimensions of business and personal growth. This series goes beyond traditional metrics, exploring the philosophies, mindsets, habits, and life lessons from those who've successfully navigated the landscape of entrepreneurship and leadership. Peer into the minds of those who've mastered the art of business innovation, partnerships, and those that are rewriting the rules of revenue. Tap into their actionable advice and practical playbooks that can be used to unlock growth in your own world.
Welcome back to another episode of Growth Unlocked. I'm your host, Kieran Cron. So most companies chase rapid scale, but what if they're building skyscrapers on sand? Rich Bishop is a leader in the RevOps space, and he joins me today to unpack why aligning revenue operations and harnessing AI aren't just enhancements, but they're actually pretty essential foundations for sustainable, profitable scale. Rich, thanks a lot for joining us.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Yeah, let's do this. So, Rich, Mid-Game Consulting, where you're leading at the moment, really advocates for aligning go-to-market teams to optimize revenue. What are the most common pitfalls that companies face in this alignment, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, misalignment is such a backbreaker for the growth of companies in many ways. And you see it in terms of department silos. Marketing doesn't necessarily talk well or work well with sales. Sales doesn't necessarily work well with implementation. And those teams don't necessarily work with the client success team. And sometimes that can be a very subtle misalignment that takes place. A lot of times it comes from a misalignment of KPIs and a separation of the planning process where going into the year, building the budgets, the financial plans for the board, there's a silo in that process where marketing will put together their numbers, sales will put together theirs, and so on, rather than looking at it as a connected process across the board where one feeds the other and so on. What's interesting is that there are a lot of larger companies that still fall into this trap, whether they've grown quickly, whether it's just been personnel changes over time have kind of caused some of these silos. But the silos and the misalignment of the KPIs end up leading the teams to go in different directions, which can be very detrimental to the growth of the company and slow it down.
Mm. Yeah, it's such a good point around the metrics. I mean, I can imagine that that's an absolute disaster if you've got each department looking at separate metrics that don't really align with where the company is moving. And it also makes me think about something that I've been pondering more recently in terms of, I guess, like compensation comes into this as well, right? In terms of how you're rewarding people based off driving the right kind of outcomes and behaviors. And I've always wondered, like, would it be more beneficial for the customer, right? Because that's the most important thing, is driving outcomes for the customer, to align compensation and metrics and KPIs around things that are important to the customer, and even think about, like, outside of sales, how could compensation be leveraged to drive the right kind of behaviors for, like marketing, maybe even for customer success. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, one of the more common ones that I've seen, especially between marketing and sales, is marketing is compensated and judged on the KPI of MQLs created, right? How many marketing qualified leads can we throw over the fence? But what ends up happening in those situations, if there's not a quality check on the other side of how strong are those MQLs and do they meet certain criteria that we need in order to truly convert them into sales on the other side, is that you get a lot of low quality that ends up going across the fence to the sales team. Sales team complains about it, ends up getting frustrated if nothing's done about it, and then ends up generating their own leads because they feel more confident in what they're generating. And now you have two different teams generating marketing qualified leads with different definitions, right? So a lot of times you can use and leverage compensation to look at the quality. What are the conversion rates downstream? And yes, we're going to judge you on the number of MQLs that are taking place, but how are those translating into converted opportunities on the other side and into sales? And there can be a feedback loop or even a kicker that's built into some of the compensation mechanisms there that end up driving some of the right kinds of behavior. And you can take some of that same philosophy downstream to client success and how are they managing their customers. And again, I've seen sales reps who just want the next sale and they'll throw it over the fence. So they may not necessarily in those types of situations bring on the customers in the right way. Or maybe they'll embellish the capabilities a little bit of what the company can do, and they'll throw it over the fence to implementation and client success. And then all of a sudden it's client success and implementation that's holding the bag, saying, hey, no, we can't do these things that the salesperson promised. And now you have a retention issue on the back end, right? All of these pieces are connected, and you can create some quality checks and some quality inputs to the compensation process that ensures that you've got the right information moving from one team to the next, and that you've got the smoothest possible handoffs.
It's a great point. And one of the things that I really like about the spiced methodology that Winning by Design had put together is the fact that it's like transferable between different departments. And when you look at like the P and the I and the C, so like pain, impact, and critical event, I think that like by capturing that information, or even through like call recordings and using AI to create summaries and make sure that data is housed in the CRM, then can help smooth out that handover process in terms of making sure that CS actually know what's important to the customer, what they're really trying to achieve by buying that solution, and then having different teams kind of own those different parts, but also have that alignment, like you said before, in terms of everyone's kind of speaking the same language across different parts of the business.
Yeah, and the expectations of the handoff points are very clear. Right? The more black and white that you can make them, the better off you're going to be. If you leave the handoff points up to judgment from anybody in that process, chances are pretty good something's going to be missed or something's going to miss expectations out on the other side. So making those handoff points and requirements as black and white as possible allows you to be as objective as possible with those handoffs and make sure that you've got that smooth transition along the way.
Absolutely. And again, like, I mentioned AI before, but I think that's where it's really powerful because often people have their own interpretations and I guess biases in terms of how they're viewing a certain situation. But AI typically doesn't have that. I mean, it can, but generally speaking, like its ability to look at things objectively in terms of like making it very clear and succinct around what's important to the customer is, I think, quite helpful.
Absolutely. There are a number of tools out there that can read, the conversation text and be able to give that kind of feedback along the way and be able to create summaries and even feed them back into the CRM systems along the way that make it easier to have that transition happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rich, you often emphasize the danger of scaling without strong foundations. Why do you think so many companies prioritize really rapid growth over operational strength, even when the risks seem to be pretty well known?
It's interesting because there are a lot of companies that when they start scale, the word scale has this sexiness to it that everybody wants to talk about scaling. Everybody wants to grow fast. And when you go from $100,000 in revenue to $1 million in revenue, it's an ego thing at the same time, right? You feel good that, hey, look how fast we've grown and how much we've grown. we're past the days of growth at all costs. Because what ends up happening is when you grow very quickly without getting the right kind of foundation in place, you use the analogy in the intro of building a skyscraper on sand. You can build it up quickly, but if you don't have that foundation in place, eventually it's going to crumble, or it's going to be that much harder to build the foundation, right? The further you get away from the beginning, when you're ready to set that foundation, the harder it's going to be to rip and replace what's there. So in the way that manifests itself is it becomes a burden on the people within the company. So you have systems, you have processes, you have people, and those three interact. And a strong foundation really relies on the processes and the systems to support it so that the people can do their job as effectively as possible. When there's rapid growth without building that foundational mechanism up front, it becomes a manual process, or the burden goes onto the team. So you end up either hiring more people than you truly need, or you're going to put much more on their plates than what they're comfortable and capable of handling for a period of time, and you're going to burn them out. So you're going to lose good people, right? You're going to end up with junk data, junk systems, broken processes that at some point in time, in order for you to continue and raise the ceiling of where you are, you're going to have to come back to putting those systems and processes in place in a way that works, in a way that's scalable. And so the earlier you can do it, or at least start your growth with that aspect in mind as you do it, and know that you're going to have to come back to it, the sooner you can do that, the better off you're going to be for that long-term sustainable growth that most companies and investors today are looking for.
Mm. I think you hit on a point there that I've noticed a lot recently, that, a lot of customers that I'm having conversations with, they often fall into this trap of like rushing into a shiny new object, right? It could be a CRM or an automation tool, or, there's tens of thousands of pieces of tech that exist these days and new ones coming out every day. And they kind of rush into the technology or the systems, as you mentioned before, without actually thinking about, firstly, the strategy and then the processes, right? And so often there's this kind of, I guess, in a way, like dissatisfaction with the ROI that they're getting from the technology, because they haven't spent enough time up front thinking about the strategy and, even simple stuff in terms of like, what does your actual customer journey look like? Who are your ICP? How do we have all of that documented so we know how the system should be built to reflect that, right?
A lot of times I see companies changing their processes and their people to fit the systems that they have, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, I completely agree with you. It starts with understanding the customer journey, your ICP, how do they work? How do we need to serve them? And now let's build around supporting that and supporting that. What systems do we need to do that? What people do we need in order to make that happen? As opposed to, and what we see all the time now is companies are looking to reduce the tech stack that they have, because they've gone through this process of growth by adding one Band-Aid to another, or they're buying a solution to solve for one particular issue, and then they're buying another solution to solve for another issue, when you could have thought through that more strategically. Maybe there was a different solution out there that could handle both. And now you're bloating your expenses, and it creates a number of other problems downstream if you think about it that way.
Mm. And I guess that's why we've probably seen the rise in the last, say, 5-6 years of these SaaS companies building more on a platform level. There's still a lot of point solutions, but you're seeing more and more of these companies positioning as a platform, right? So yeah, they can help customers to consolidate, and instead of using 5 tools, they can just bring it all under the one roof.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. But what's been interesting over the last 2 or 3 years is, with the rise of AI and automation, there are so many tools that almost feels like we're going back to the early 2000s, when before that platform mentality was in place. So now you have a lot of these other potential tools that are popping up. You've got an AI note taker, you've got an AI training tool, you've got all of these different things that are popping up. I think in the long run, that consolidates back down into a platform basis, because that is what's much more sustainable. But the technology is so new that new solutions are popping up all the time. And so from the main solution standpoint, the HubSpots of the world, you've got a central area that can do quite a bit of it. And HubSpot in particular is doing a great job of adding AI and other tools to it. But when you look at some of these other solutions that are out there, I do think you're going to see some consolidation over the next couple of years once people start to figure out and understand how this impacts their business and creates an ROI for them.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on HubSpot and its integration of AI into the platform. Are there any parts of HubSpot that you're excited about or that you've got your hands on recently?
I do like where some of the AI is going. Some of the meeting intelligence that's there, I think there's a lot to build on from there, and understanding some of the conversational aspects of what's happening. I think there are some other tools that integrate well with HubSpot that make it an interesting dynamic in the ecosystem of really taking a lot of manual work out of what a sales rep is doing on a day-to-day basis, or the marketing team is doing, and helping them to be much more effective in automating what is possible in their processes, rather than all of these manual touches that end up sucking so much time out of these customer-facing people that we want to make sure are in front of the customer as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a meeting with one of our customers last week who mentioned to me that half of their consultants' time is spent on manual data entry, putting stuff into the CRM, and then generating proposals for customers as well. And I was like, that's a pretty significant amount of wastage, right? I can imagine how much these consultants wouldn't be cheap, and the opportunity cost as well. It's not just like the labor cost, but it's also what would you do with that time back? More meaningful things, probably having more conversations with customers, right?
Yeah, that use case that you give is actually a fairly simple one overall. The dynamics of that business may be a little bit more complicated, but overall, as long as the data exists somewhere in the ecosystem, you should be able to automate quite a bit of that input into whatever system or proposal technology that's being used. That's a fairly easy process to automate. Much easier to automate than it is for me to say.
For sure. Yeah, you're right. And that's what I love about this technology is just getting those insights out of the conversation into the CRM. Once you've got that, then you can basically use tools like PandaDoc or whatever it might be to just easily generate proposals with that tokenization. So yeah, I love it. In terms of the sales side, Rich, so like I think generally speaking, like most people would agree that like the traditional sort of sales process or sales funnel has evolved a lot, right? I mean, it should have, at least, because the way that people buy these days, not just on B2C, but the B2B side, into what I love by Winning by Design, which is this sort of bow tie revenue model, which actually focuses equally on the retention piece as much as it does around expansion. How can businesses adapt to shift to this kind of change in, I guess, buying behavior and taking that kind of bow tie model into consideration?
The bow tie model is a very interesting way to look at the customer journey and the revenue growth of a business. Whenever you're creating a sales plan, if we were to just focus on sales for a second, whenever you're building a sales plan for the next year, the first place you start is, what is our churn rate? Because in order for you to grow, you need to overcome that churn rate. So if we're just using round numbers, if we're a $100 million company and we have a churn rate of 15%, that means that off the top, we're losing $15 million that we need to make up in new sales next year just to get to a zero growth. That becomes very hard to sustain and very hard to keep going, let alone trying to grow on top of that at 20, 30, 40%, whatever growth uh, goals you have in the business. So sometimes it makes a lot more sense to focus on the compounding growth that you get by moving that 15 million loss every year to 5 million. How do we have a 95% retention rate, which is an excellent retention rate? How do we have that so that we have much less to make up for and keep going? And further to that, when you look at that, the cost of adding $15 million in sales for a sales rep is totally different than having a client success team of even 2 or 3 people to manage that customer list and reduce that down by $10 million, right? So the cost of saving $10 million in customers is a lot less than adding $10 million in new customers. So when you look at the bow tie model, it helps you to see what that compounding retention and growth from existing customers can do to the long-term growth of the company, and how important it is to really focus on that side as the foundation. And then the sales and marketing side that you typically would have focused on in the past becomes what then goes over the top of what we have from our base customers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the crazy thing is, a lot of businesses that I speak to, actually, I think the majority of them focus more on the right side of the bow tie, which is around acquisition. And the other side, retention and expansion, is usually a bit of an afterthought, which is kind of crazy.
It's interesting because the retention side is, as we just discussed, one of the most important for growth, especially if you're looking to grow very quickly. You have to stabilize that customer base. And frankly, you really should not scale a company unless you have a stable customer base, because you're just going to continue to compound this issue and continue to run into issues on the sales and marketing side, trying to make up for the ground that you're losing every year. So to look at it in that way is absolutely critical to tie those pieces together and make sure that the focus is on the compounding growth that you're going to get from retaining and expanding the existing customers you have.
For sure. Yeah, it's like you wouldn't want to have a bucket that's got a bunch of holes in the bottom and you're constantly trying to keep it full of water because it's just going to keep leaking, right? So you need to plug those holes before you can keep topping it up.
And so much more effort to put more water in the top of it than it is to just plug the hole.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Rich, in your white paper, the AI driven revenue engine, you talk about the score model, which I think is really interesting. Can you elaborate on how AI can enhance the onboarding, retain, and expand stages of that model?
Sure. The score model is really just an easy way to talk about the bow tie model. So when we look at that, the S is seduce or attract new potential customers in. The C is convert those prospects into customers. O is onboard them and bring them into the ecosystem. R is retain, and E is expand. So SCORE just becomes a really easy acronym to be able to talk about the bow tie model in a way that you can then break down those individual pieces. So in our white paper, the AI driven revenue engine, we do talk about the onboarding process, the retention process, and the expansion process, and where AI can come into play. So when we look at onboarding and implementing customers into our ecosystem and solutions, you have AI implementation assistants. There are AI driven LMS systems that can literally walk the customer through the system in a step-by-step way. Of course, you have to put some time into building those things, but once it's there, you can continue to repeat and refresh that on a regular basis without having somebody there needing to be on the phone with the customer. And frankly, customers right now are looking for as much self-service as possible. So it helps us to really nail that side of it down. And then there's also once they're on board and moving forward, there's a lot of in-app guidance. And as a user on the internet or using different systems, I'm sure you've seen some of these things where In-app guidance is there to say, hey, you haven't clicked on this feature over here in a while. Just a reminder, here's how the feature works. So there are things like that that are available. But then also on the retention side, retention is really going to be based on, of course, leveraging the system and being in the system and using the different aspects of it. So you can monitor the customer's usage. You can have AI over the top of that then can let you know, hey, this user used to use or had been using the system X percentage of the time, that now has dipped. You may want to reach out and speak to them about how they're using the system or what's going on, right? So you have the ability now to alert your client success team on potential usage issues or potential churn issues well before they happen in a way that really helps on the retention side. And then when we move to expansion, then there are opportunities to really highlight accurately cross-sell and upsell opportunities. So as a customer is using your solution, maybe you can access other solutions that they're using. You can get a real good view of how they're using the system and be able to see where cross-sell and upsell opportunities may exist with a high degree of accuracy.
Some great points there. Yeah, and I think that part you mentioned around product or application usage, for SaaS companies, getting that back into the CRM and in the places where your CS team, account management team, sales team is spending their time is really helpful. And then how we actually kind of trigger off communications to customers, because at the end of the day, I think being proactive is really important in those situations. The last thing you want to do is to have to fight a fire when a customer is unhappy because they haven't been getting the value that they expected out of the platform, right?
Yeah, exactly. The more proactive you can be, the better off you're going to be. And that principle translates all the way upstream into marketing as well, right? Being reactive is great because you've got somebody that has raised their hand, but the more proactive you can be and the more that you can understand what's important to the prospect, the more that you can be there and meet them before they get to the point that they're ready, so that you're top of mind when they're ready to make a decision to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rich, you have a lot of experience working with companies in the private equity space. What steps can companies take to improve their revenue quality and make themselves more attractive to investors?
Revenue quality is going to be extremely important to the value of the company. So mostly in the private world, a company's value is going to be based on its EBITDA, its profitability, um, with a multiple on top of that. And so it's really going to be about maximizing that and making sure that that EBITDA is predictable moving forward. Now, the biggest aspect, of course, of your profitability is the revenue that you're bringing in. So, is your revenue recurring, or are you creating a bunch of one-time transactions every time? So, your sales motion is to get a new customer in the door, but you're constantly having to do that without a recurring revenue model in place, right? So, you've got the recurrence of the revenue. You've got also then the dispersion of the customers. So how reliant are you on 2 or 3 customers versus do you have 100 different customers, right? There are a lot of these pieces that are taken into consideration to create a predictable view of revenue. So when you do that, it's important to understand and know your KPIs up front, right? What are my retention rates, net retention, gross retention? What are my conversion rates? All of those major KPIs that we talk about when we look at the revenue cycle for companies. Also, how diverse is your customer base? If you don't have a recurring revenue model, can you start to move in that direction and create that revenue, that recurring model for your customers? And how do you improve your customer retention? No matter where you are, you can always improve that. And that retention is probably the biggest indicator of the revenue predictability moving forward. So getting those things in place and then evaluating overall what that revenue structure looks like and how that quality fits helps you to make the changes that you need to really set yourself up.
Mm, yeah, that's some really good insights there, and it kind of aligns with why we see these massive multiples on B2B SaaS companies, right? I mean, at least the ones that are doing well in terms of like the amount of recurring revenue, how long they've retained those customers for, their NRR. Even though a lot of those businesses are not profitable in the beginning, that's just been such a major focus for these private equity firms from an acquisition perspective, right?
Yes, but the profitability is becoming more and more important. So it was that profitability wasn't as important as growth. It's now flipped. The importance really is the profitability. So you want to grow, but you want to do it in a profitable way, which is where when we go back to making sure you've got the right foundation in place, that's becoming more and more important to the value of these companies. Because a private equity firm specifically will hold a company for somewhere between 3 to 7 years. Usually it's 5, right? That's the median that we look at. So if they're going to purchase a company and own it for 5 years, they want to know as in a predictable way as possible that they're going to get the growth in that 5 years that they need in order to get the return for their shareholders. So being able to show the predictability in what you're doing adds to the value, which also improves the multiple that you're going to be talking about.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely been such a major shift, and I think it's about time, right? I mean, like, I guess capital was so readily available, and businesses were, for a large part, like, not really that responsible in terms of how they went out hiring, a lot of people, and that's why we've seen so many redundancies over the last couple of years.
And that's going to continue. That's one of the interesting areas with AI right now is that AI and automation is creating such efficiencies as the technology gets stronger and stronger that you're going to see companies really ratchet up the amount of redundancies that they're working with because you're going to have entire roles like an SDR and BDR type of role, which is really going to be threatened by the technology that's emerging right now and how good it's becoming. The quality is really improving. And so you're going to be able to automate a lot more, have technology be used in these processes a lot more, which is going to create a little bit less of a need for some of the people that are there, but also improve profitability and value of the company along the way. So there's going to be a lot of pressure in that space.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's pretty wild how quickly the technology is improving in quality. Like, we're building agents now for ourselves and for our clients, which, like 12 months ago, you couldn't even imagine that this kind of stuff would be possible in terms of being able to leverage insights to create like hyper personalization, to do research for salespeople before they start picking up the phone and making calls. So it's just going to get better day by day.
Absolutely. And some of those agents and prepping for the sales reps allow them to make much more phone calls and be in front of the customer a lot more. So now all of a sudden they're making 10% more phone calls, 25% more phone calls, which then leads to 25% more meetings and 25% more sales. So it cascades down through the process when you can create those efficiencies on the front end.
Yeah, 100%. Rich, shifting gears a little bit, I guess on the personal side of things, how do your passions outside of work, such as things like travel and I guess experiencing the world, influence your professional philosophy and your mindset?
It comes down to a growth mindset in many ways. And for me, yes, I love to travel. I love to see the sights. I love to have new experiences in my personal life, whether that be hiking, whether that be seeing different places. It, but within business, it's important because things are constantly changing. And you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable if you're going to be successful. I heard a really good analogy the other day that early in our careers, we tend to find what works and build systems and processes for ourselves around what works. So we get into this pathway that works really well for us for a period of time. But that pathway eventually becomes a rut because the world around us years down the line is not the same as what it had been when we created those paths to begin with. And sometimes you can get so set in those paths that it's really hard to get out and to adapt to some of the changes that are happening around you. So when I look at my career as well as in my personal life, I really do like to keep things fresh, have new experiences, be able to be comfortable being in new and uncomfortable positions, because down the line, the environment around me is going to change. And the more adaptable I am, the better off I'm going to be. I think that's also true and should be true for companies as well, that you can get in a world where what you've done works so well, but then you've got these disruptors that come out of nowhere seemingly and completely change the game. If you don't adapt to what's happening around you, you're going to be dead.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great point. And I think that more and more it's becoming obvious that people need to start waking up and embracing technology and AI more in their day-to-day, because it's not necessarily that the AI is going to take your job. It's the person that's using AI more effectively than you, right? So yeah, I think we're going to see just more and more of that integration into people's lives. And I think that the sooner you can get around it, the more you're going to give yourself a head start and everyone else.
I heard a really good analogy this morning. I was at a conference earlier today here in Tampa, and one of the presenters said that AI is your intern. It's not your chief marketing officer. And it was a marketing presentation, so that was the focus, right? But AI is going to be a tool to help you prepare information. It's not necessarily going to be setting and executing on the strategy. That's still on you to do. So I think you're spot on. It's the people that understand that and can leverage those tools to execute on the strategy that they're putting together, use it for ideas, use it for preparation, all of those pieces. It's the ones that can do that the best that are going to do the best over time in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess continue on that theme of the personal side, Rich. Do you mind sharing, I guess, a challenging experience from your career that pretty significantly impacted your perspective on the world, or I guess how you might live your life today?
Yeah, back probably about 15, 20 years ago, I really I knew that I wanted to get into consulting, and I knew that I wanted to work with businesses and business leaders. I had a passion for leadership development and had an opportunity to work with the leadership guru, John Maxwell, and became certified through him to coach, train, and speak. And really started going down that path while I was also carrying a full-time job at Nestle. And I had two young kids at home. It just was too much for me. But it was something that I really wanted to do and had a lot of passion for. But I got to the point that I had to give it up. And that was a really hard lesson for me at that point, just that timing is so important. But the interesting thing is that it's through that experience that I had an opportunity to actually give a leadership development presentation to some of the sales team. And at the time I was in finance, to the sales team at Nestle. And it went really well. And an opportunity for a project came up a couple months later that they needed somebody with analytical skills. And so they tapped me on the shoulder as the finance person to say, hey, can you prove out this concept that using data and analytics to drive our sales team to the right places, it is actually viable? Do we have the data and can we do this? And can we use this to help turn some of the business around? And they tapped me on the shoulder to run that project in my finance role. We proved the point, and they said, all right, well, now we need you to move over and actually create a sales operations team to run this long term. And that pivot was created because of something that I thought was a dead end. So that lesson that I learned about pivoting was really important and still really weighs on me as I go through my career, that you may be coming up to a dead end or what may seem like a dead end, but going back to being nimble and working with what's around you, you can make those pivots and end up in a much better place.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really great life lesson for sure, and a good reminder that sometimes mentally we might see that as being like the end of the road or a blocker, but if you go into it with your eyes open, yeah, opportunities present themselves in pretty weird and wonderful ways. So I can definitely agree with that. Rich, I guess one thing I always like to ask my guests is, let's say it was possible to teleport and to go back in time. If you could go back and have a conversation with yourself at age 21, what would you say to Rich Bishop? What advice would you give yourself?
Focus on the journey and not the destination. When I was 21, I had ambitions of being a CFO in a Fortune 500 company. Obviously, I'm in a very, very different place in my career right now, and I wouldn't change it for anything. I think a lot of people when they're that age are very ambitious, probably the most ambitious that they're going to be in their careers. And the journey itself, for me, I found is the most important part. And the growth that you go through along the way, the things that you learn, and not continuously focusing on the destination. I've seen a lot of people who continue to focus on a destination without paying attention to the journey, and they end up missing out on all of the good stuff that comes from that journey. So that would definitely be it.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good reminder, isn't it? Because I think sometimes we can get, you know, frustrated, feel like things aren't kind of moving the direction that we want, or we might not be in the right place at that point in time. But in reality, they're all just like chapters in a book, right? And stepping stones in the pathway of life. And each of those different chapters is essentially giving you exposure to new experiences, different perspectives. You're picking up new capabilities, and all those things just accumulate over time.
Exactly. Yeah. And one chapter leads to another, which may then create a completely different chapter for the next one. So, yeah, it's about that journey and enjoying it along the way, and making sure that you're adapting to what's happening.
Really well said. Rich, if people wanted to connect with you, follow along, learn more about what you're doing, what's the best place for them to do that?
Sure. The best place would be to go to midgameconsulting.com, midgameconsulting.com, as well as reaching out to me on LinkedIn. I'm active there, and my profile can be found at richbishop2. That's the number 2. So linkedin.com/in/richbishop2. Please reach out. I'd love to connect and have a conversation.
Awesome. Rich, thanks a lot. It's been a really insightful conversation. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Kieran. Great to talk to you.
Cheers. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Unlocked Beyond Scale. If you enjoyed the show, it would really be appreciated if you can leave a 5-star review wherever you consume your podcasts. And while you're there, why not subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes? If you'd like to learn about how to drive profitable scale in your business, gain clarity on your direction, and improve your business valuation, click the link in the show notes to connect with Kieran.